Welcome to the Gold Newsletter Podcast, your bank of knowledge of investments, economics, and geopolitics. Go to goldnewsletter.com for our publications and archives to increase your wealth monetarily and educationally.
This is Fergus Hodgson with the Gold Newsletter Podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm excited to be broadcasting actually from Dublin, Ireland right now. And I'm speaking with, I guess, an old acquaintance. I've not known him, I've not met you personally, Mike, but Michael Kennedy. He is the Director of Communications and Development for the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms in Canada, originally from Cape Breton, a lovely part of the maritime region of Canada, and now living in Montreal. So, Michael, thanks so much for joining the show.
Glad to be with you, Fergus.
Right, and we've actually, obviously our audience is based largely in the United States and Canada, but I've been looking at guests all over the place in recent time, in both Latin America in particular, but also in Europe. And maybe Canada doesn't get examined enough by Americans. Those in the mining sector, though, or the junior resource sector, pay more attention and are concerned about what's going on in Canada, the general sentiment. Your particular angle, or maybe litmus test of the country or the sentiment there, is through the Campus Freedom Index. You basically explore the state of free speech in the educational and in higher education. And you've been working on this for how many years?
We launched the Campus Freedom Index the first year that the Justice Center was founded, which was 2011, and we've been doing it annually ever since. That's
great. And this has only really come to light, the lack of free speech on campus, in recent years. Have you observed a trend? I know you've only been doing it for this past 7 years, but has there been a change that you've witnessed over that time that is both either alarming or positive? What have you observed in the past few years?
Well, the Campus Freedom Index provides us a good reference point to do that kind of year-over-year analysis. And unfortunately, what we've noticed is that the total number of F grades, we assign 5 letter grades to each university, A through F. And we noticed that there's a similar number of F grades every year. There's a similarly low number of A grades every year. So we're not seeing a big shift in the total numbers. However, we do see numerous individual cases of specific universities or specific student unions changing their behaviors or abolishing bad policies that we flagged as being problematic to get a better grade in the future. So there is a lot of shifting happening at the individual university campus level, but overall the aggregate suggests that things aren't changing that much.
That's my concern about reading a lot of these news stories, because we hear so often about some university kicking out a student or banning the pro-life student alliance or whatever it may be, or having basically some sort of political twist. Now, of course, the tendency, let me just say it gently, is that the socialist or progressive angle is given a higher standing than those who are maybe for more limited government. But my fear when we read these stories is that maybe there's some sort of bias in the understanding. So, for example, a corollary might be police brutality or police violence. There is the sentiment or the sense among many people that police violence or brutality has gone way up in recent years. But the truth is actually that it's just that we have become so much better at measuring or observing police violence that we get a misrepresentation. So your basic conclusion is that it may seem like campus free speech has gotten out of hand, or lack thereof has gotten out of hand, but the actual measurements, at least in the last decade or so, don't suggest any strong pattern one way or the other.
Well, there is a strong pattern that the Campus Freedom Index shows, and that is that there's a huge problem with censorship on campus. Last year, we had a total of 240 grades for two grades for each university and 2 grades for each student union.
Right.
And there were 38 F grades, which was an increase of about 6 over 2016. So we're seeing a substantial amount of F grades and only a handful of A grades. So the data, even though it's not changing year over year much, it certainly shows that there's a big problem where almost half of all universities, public universities in Canada, are going beyond the legal obligation to censor speech and are restricting what would be free expression off campus.
Right. I mean, actually, let's just do a few case studies, since these are always entertaining, about what these because these F grades, they don't come easily. You've got to work hard to earn such a status, an unenviable status. So, why don't you give people a few examples that really have stood out to you in your time running this index?
Sure. So I'll just mention that the Justice Center is a nonprofit legal firm. We provide pro bono legal assistance to Canadians whose free speech or other fundamental freedoms are violated. And we do have a particular focus on defending students. So a lot of our cases that we'll litigate overlap with cases that are in the Campus Freedom Index. And one such case is at the University of Alberta. We're currently challenging this in court. The university decided to slap Pro-Life Student Club with a $17,500 security fee because the university had heard that there were going to be protests and possibly vandalism in protest to this event happening. And so they decided to charge the student group with the fees. And we make the point, when this happens, it's a blame the victim approach. You're saying that you're expecting other students to break the law and possibly vandalize property and to disrupt the student group's event. But instead of charging those vandalizers and those protesters with a security fee, you're charging the student group that's simply trying to express themselves on campus. And we see this at numerous universities, and oftentimes universities will use the security fee tactic as a way of avoiding having to outright cancel a speaker, say, or having to outright ban a student group. Rather than do that and garner a lot of controversy that way, they think that they can get away with charging these huge security fees that are more even than annual tuition at the University of Alberta to a group of students that obviously wouldn't be able to pay for it. And we saw this at Wilfrid Laurier University this year as well. This will certainly be included in the 2018 Campus Freedom Index. But Lindsay Shepherd, the now infamous Ms. Shepherd, who was the victim of bullying by her administration and professors at Wilfrid Laurier University, she started a club that seeks to advocate on behalf of free expression and the free exchange of ideas. And her club has now been hit with 2 security fees for 2 of their events. But fortunately, thanks to Lindsay's celebrity, she's been able to raise that money very easily thanks to her supporters online. But other student groups that don't have the same level of notoriety as Ms. Shepherd, obviously they're not as successful in paying these huge fees. So we're challenging those in court, and we're also giving the University of Alberta an F for that particular behavior.
Yeah, the irony is so rich there. It's just crazy that you start a group to promote free speech and you're the one immediately cracked down on. And
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, the weird thing to me too is the way that, well, let me back up a second. I often see these crackdowns on free speech or maybe biases at universities as predictable outcomes of a bureaucratized or centralized education system. But how different are the few private universities in Canada relative to those that you measure? Do you measure any private universities?
We don't, and part of the reason is that there aren't that many private universities, especially not ones that eat up a large chunk of the university-going population. There might be a handful of private universities that are very well known in Canada. So we focus on public universities, which also makes the legal argument easier because obviously private universities have a lot more leeway to restrict expression that doesn't fit with their values, so long as they're advertising it to students ahead of time. So we focus exclusively on public universities.
Right. Well, yeah, my sense is that the private ones would have a different angle, but I'm not so sure because, as you said, for whatever reason, there's just a very small market for private higher education in Canada relative to the United States. And the other point, or one of the reasons why I wanted to get you on, is that this battle over free speech on campus is somewhat of a symbol of free speech more broadly in society because it's a public domain. It's where we go to debate this topic. Whereas, private university or private institutions, it's not really a matter of public debate. It's a private decision how you handle speech in that environment. Now, actually, I should just mention, too, that if people are not familiar with the organization, it's very similar to the Institute for Justice in the United States. It's kind of the Canada's equivalent, but with their own angle, of course. Mm-hmm. Before we started recording, you mentioned that there are some bright sparks on the horizon for free speech in Canada. Now, this is both in terms of public sentiment, of legal victories. What have you seen to give you optimism that Canada is not going the wrong way, that the general public still have some common sense when it comes to freedom of expression of information?
Well, I'll speak first to the public sentiment, because I think, and I'll go back to Lindsay Shepherd's incident, because I think that was a real turning point and a real awakening for a lot of Canadians who gradually, since the Campus Freedom Index has been published, might have heard some of the stories that we've discussed from the Campus Freedom Index, or some really egregious examples of universities going too far. And I think the straw that broke the camel's back might have been Wilfrid Laurier University and what happened to Lindsay Shepherd, because I was very surprised to see not only that there were so many journalists coming to Lindsay's defense, mainstream journalists at big papers and well-known media coming to the fore to defend Ms. Shepherd and to call this out as being the university going too far. I hadn't seen that before with other cases that we've been monitoring for the Campus Freedom Index, and it really seemed that this was kind of a turning point where more Canadians had reached their saturation point, and they were no longer willing to put up with some of these really silly and egregious behaviors by universities and student unions. And I think the university's reaction to that incident, where they did a complete 180, and they even went as far as to create a task force to create a new free expression statement, which is much stronger than what they had previously. So it is an advancement in that respect. We don't think that the new statement is perfect, but we think that it's a huge improvement over what they had before. So I think there's been a shift among the public, and of course that percolates to donors of the university who might have told the president of the university privately, if this kind of stuff keeps up, then I'm taking my money elsewhere. Those are the kinds of things that do cause university administrations to rethink what they're doing. And I think we're kind of in a post-Lindsay Shepherd world now where universities are far more attentive to the negative consequences of censoring speech that might be offensive or controversial or what have you. So that, I think, is a positive thing in Canada. I think that you've seen the public come to terms with the fact that for too long, universities have been stepping on free speech rights a little too much, and that really needs to be reined back. And we also saw that electorally now. We have the federal level, Andrew Scheer, the conservative leader, who has pledged to restrict federal funding to universities that censor free expression. And now we have Doug Ford, the designate premier in Ontario, who has also promised to put strings on universities that censor free expression. And we just concluded 3 cases in Ontario of student groups who were banned by their student unions. So there certainly is a big problem in Ontario. And if Doug Ford follows through on his promise, then that will significantly change behavior at those universities, because a lot of Canadian universities receive more than 75% of their operational funding from taxpayers, and most of that is from the provincial government, not the federal government. So if provinces put strings on their funding and said, if you don't respect the charter right to free expression on your campus, then you'll lose your funding, that's going to cause a behavior change real fast.
Mate, that's really good news. And yes, I'm speaking with Michael Kennedy of the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, and his big issue is free speech in Canada on the campus in the system of higher education. And if you've not heard about the Lindsay Shepherd case, I encourage people to look into it. This one, it was so notorious that it garnered quite a substantial attention from the United States as well. This lady, from memory, she wanted to do a presentation, or did one, that included a video from Jordan Peterson, and she didn't even take a strong stand either way. But some people in university administrations or professors have almost a totalitarian mentality that they just cannot stand even any questioning of a certain line of thinking. And this I guess this will be an interesting aspect of your work. How much pushback do you get from people saying that you're just some kind of ideological wingnut, or people challenging you and the very plausibility of your project?
That's a good question. And, I think it's changed since we started. When we started, we got a lot of that criticism, especially when we released the Campus Freedom Index. Oftentimes, you'd hear from student politicians who were calling us, wingnuts or radicals or what have you.
Yeah.
But that seems to have changed over the years. And, on the other side, there's a lot of student politicians that take the Campus Freedom Index, and we've seen the Campus Freedom Index cited at student union elections. Particular candidates will run on a platform saying that they want to improve their grade to get elected in the Campus Freedom Index. That was the case at the University of Saskatchewan, actually. We had...
I love it, man. This is such good news. Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, it's really positive. He got elected as VP policy, so he had a direct hand in being able to rewrite policy. And he ran on a platform to improve the student union's grade. And actually, they were tied for first in 2013 for the best student union in the country because of the changes that they had made. So it really does pay off if you do something about it. But then there are just as many student politicians who will say, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. There's no problem here, that kind of thing. But there certainly is. There's a lot of pushback, and of course that shows you that at least they're paying attention, and that hopefully in the long run you'll see some change at those student unions as well. Because the benefit to the student union system, which is very different from the way that the U.S. organizes student life, you don't have these powerful student governments at the U.S. university level. These seem to be particular to Canada, and I think to other Commonwealth university systems. But it allows very small factions of the student population to get into power and to basically rewrite policies and change practices rather radically, and that can work to our advantage if those students happen to be in favor of free expression, or it can work to our detriment if they're very much opposed to it.
Yeah, the parallels are fascinating, and we had a similar challenge in New Zealand where you almost have a permanent student population of people who are embedded in student government, and they're just long-term students. And because most students just go about their lives and pay little attention to campus politics.
Absolutely, because they're paying a lot of money to do something other than get involved in student politics. They're there to learn skills and gain knowledge and prepare for the workforce. So they don't have time to be necessarily investing in student politics. And I think New Zealand actually has a leg up on us. And this is something that we've been starting to move forward with advocating on. But in New Zealand, I believe it's the case that students can opt out of their student union, which really does help because, like you were just saying, there's so much apathy that most students would rather keep the $1,000 or more that they're paying to those student unions every year. They would rather be able to pocket that and just not participate in student politics. And in New Zealand and Australia, students do have the opportunity to do that. But in Canada, if you want to study at the University of Toronto, you must pay fees to the University of Toronto's designated student union.
That was not in place when I was studying in New Zealand, so I cannot verify that. But if it is the case, that's great news, and I recommend pushing for that in Canada. That would be a wonderful advantage because then the student union it would be like an industry association that has to appeal to the members of the industry and say, we're going to offer you these wonderful services, why don't you join us? And if you don't, you'll miss out on all the fun. But so one other aspect, which I'm not sure whether you've looked at closely, is the topic content that is or is not censored or not censored. So I think people who listen to this show are interested in finance and business, of course, and finance it's a little bit like engineering or mathematics, where there's not so much of a political or ideological component. But are there any particular fields at the universities that have caused a great deal of friction?
That's a good question, and with the Campus Freedom Index, we don't delve into that kind of viewpoint diversity angle of it, which is very important, and it certainly is becoming more of a problem. And I think Jordan Peterson has shed a lot of light on the problem with certain humanities and social sciences faculties that have really become overwhelmingly populated by postmodernist, neo-Marxist type, which hasn't been good for those disciplines. But I say that it boils down pretty much the same in Canada that it would in the United States or other countries in terms of the degree to which that is a problem. And there is a big movement now to try to improve the amount of faculty diversity in particular disciplines. Some universities, like the University of Chicago, are looking at strategies to help them do that. So it's similar to what you're seeing generally in terms of the public climate for free speech. The public and many of the stakeholders are starting to realize that the pendulum has swung too far the wrong way, and it's time to pull it back a bit.
Right, mate. Now, for people who are considering studying in, working in, being involved with higher education, are there any bright spots in Canada or any universities, if you're allowed to, that you can give praise to?
Actually, yes, and we were very pleased in 2017. It was the first time. So the Campus Freedom Index offers 2 letter grades for each university, one for their policies and one for their practices. And the reason that we divide those is because oftentimes universities will talk a very good game, but they won't walk the walk, and they'll act very differently from their policies. So we give 2 grades, A through F, to each university. And last year was the first year that we have awarded 2 A grades to a university for both policies and practices. That was Bishop's University, a small liberal arts university in Quebec. They have excellent policies, very clear that the university will side with free expression, and that free expression and academic freedom are paramount values at the university. And they also put their money where their mouth is, because they invited a controversial lawyer who had represented a high-profile Canadian journalist who was charged with sexual harassment and sexual assault charges. She was considered by some on the left to be an apologist for misogyny and an apologist for male violence against women and this sort of thing. And she was his attorney, so she had an obligation to defend him. And so she was invited to Bishop's. There was a call for Bishop's to cancel her for the reasons that I just stated.
Right.
And the university president said absolutely not. He even wrote an op-ed in the Montreal Gazette, which is one of the big newspapers in Quebec, where he explained, regardless of whether you agree with her or not, if you show up and listen to her and ask questions, you'll benefit from that experience. Whether she changes your mind or whether she reinforces what you already think of her, come out and hear what she has to say and challenge her yourself during the question period. That's how a university is supposed to run. And so for that, we gave Bishop's 2 A's across the board. So they were very pleased with that. And really, we want universities to brag about their grades in the Campus Freedom Index when we do well, because we want it to be, a mark that they can show to their future students and say, come to our university because we're going to let you speak your mind. And if advocacy and activism matters to you, this is the campus for you.
That's dynamite. Look, people, I am a Canadian citizen, but I live outside the country, and the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms is one organization I look to stay up informed on what is going on, both in terms of free speech, but other cases beyond the campus around. And yes, you can go to jccf.ca, but if you want to focus on the university life, it's just campusfreedomindex.ca. So, and Michael Kennedy, he's on Twitter, Facebook. If you want to follow him, we'll include those links in the show notes. So, any final comments that we didn't get to?
Well, if any of your listeners are in Toronto, we're hosting Mark Stein for what should be a rousing speech on this Friday, the inaugural George Jonas Freedom Award dinner in honor of a great freedom fighter in Canada, George Jonas. And Mark Stein is the first recipient of that award, so that should be a fun night in Toronto. If you want more information on that, check out our website, jccf.ca.
Dynamite, yeah. George Jonas, the George Jonas Freedom Award dinner, June 15th in Toronto, and Mark Stein, a worthy recipient, and also he's been a a speaker at our New Orleans investment conference in the past. So,
oh, great.
Thanks for your time, Michael, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, Fergus. Take care.
Cheers.